Hello, everybody. Yes, hello, good morning. Wow, good turnout. And I know we've got live stream from offices across EMEA. I'm very excited. I'll just introduce Arianna very quickly. She needs no introduction, so I thought I'd say something, a personal reflection about Arianna. I'm, as some of you know, because I talk about it a lot, I'm hugely passionate about like my family, the internet, and I would put like sleep there. And when I first heard Arianna's talk, Sleeping Your Way to the Top, how many of you have heard about that? I thought she is amazing. Not because the way you termed it, and you were one of the, I think you were the first person I heard talk about it, but also because I really, as someone who's quite passionate about sleep, I find it's quite unpopular. You know, it's like, oh, let's meet at this time in the morning for a run. Oh, let's have another drink. You know, let's have a meeting at this time with the US. I find that even in my personal life, like my friends aren't very pro-sleep. And so it does require a cultural change. And I think Arianna is one of the pioneers of that change. Same goes for something in my conversations with my father about what is success. Switching to another topic that needs a cultural change and a rethink. And I think Arianna's amazing at thinking about these, talking vocally about them in a great storytelling way. And so I'm very excited. I know you all are. So without any further ado, Arianna, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. I love having a fabulous Turkish woman introduce a Greek woman with a massive accent compared to her very subtle, kind of little mysterious intonation. Where is she really from? With me, like, is she Hungarian? Is she Greek? What is she? So I'm delighted to be here. I love Google. I love everything you're doing, including all your wellness things, your sleep pods, your obsession with running, your healthy snacks. But you're right, we'll talk about sleep. There's some improvement that is needed in that department. But let's start with the big picture. Greek philosophers used to ask three questions. What do we need to know? That was before Google, when you had to work hard to know things. How do we govern the city? And how do we live a good life? And somewhere in the last 2 centuries, we stopped asking the last question. And the good life became reduced to the successful life. And the successful life became reduced to 2 metrics. Money and power, slash status, slash fame. And trying to live a life based on just these 2 metrics, it's a little bit like trying to sit on a 2-legged stool. Sooner or later, you fall off. And that's why I wrote this book, to help us introduce in our lives the 3rd metric, the 3rd leg of the stool. So it's not about denying the first 2 metrics. It's about adding a metric. And that metric of 4 pillars is very simple. It starts with our well-being and health. Because without our health and well-being, life is really not the life we want. Sometimes we are forced to deal with it, and there are a lot of lessons to be learned. But 75% of healthcare problems and costs now are coming from chronic, preventable, stress-related diseases. So there's an element of health and disease that we cannot control. But there's an awful lot that we can control and that we are kind of bringing on ourselves in one way or another. Because as Philippe Chabot, the Belgian philosopher, put it, burnout has become the disease of our civilization. And in the course of succeeding, we have sacrificed our health. Not perhaps when you're as young as many of you are here, but we see it, people in their 40s and 50s with heart disease, with high blood pressure, and then the growing increase of mental diseases, of depression, anxiety. Right now, 1 in 6 in the UK is suffering from some form of depression or anxiety. 1 in 6. So while as a civilization we've made incredible strides in solving a lot of social problems and economic problems, there is a long way to go, but we've made huge progress, we have really barely scratched the surface of identifying the inner causes of distress. And what is exciting right now, because I'm an optimist, I'm a congenital optimist, partly because I'm Greek, and partly because I'm a naturalized American. So it's a kind of irresistible combo of optimism. So my optimism comes because right now we're living in a perfect storm, where a lot of trends are converging to make this an incredible moment for the cultural shifts that you talked about. So the first trend is the growing awareness of all the incredible impact of burnout. The second trend is the new science that is validating ancient wisdom about the importance of sleep, renewal, pauses in our lives to regenerate ourselves. All those things that have been dismissed as unnecessary, all the language that has been used, especially by men. None of the men here, because they're all enlightened, but the men who designed our world, that, we'll sleep when we're dead, congratulating people for working 24/7, all these things that have kind of been part of our culture that now we need to sort of unravel and recognize that they are really a delusion. We now have a lot of science to prove that they are a delusion, and that in fact taking care of our human capital, nurturing ourselves, unplugging and recharging are all performance enhancement tools. They are not elements of checking out, far from it. They're the way to be most effective and most creative. And the other trend is that now more and more people are coming out of the closet. Not out of the closet saying they're gay, although that's happening too, and it's safer and safer, but coming out of the closet and admit that they are meditators, that they are doing mindfulness courses, and that they are actually introducing these elements into their lives. Last year 2013 was the year when CEO after CEO came out as being meditators. Mark Benioff of Salesforce told us that he's been meditating for 25 years. Ray Dalio, the CEO of one of the biggest hedge funds, Bridgewater, said he's been meditating for 35 years and described it as the foundation of his success. So something happened where all these things that before were seen as a little flaky, a little new agey, a little Californian, are now seen as safe to talk about, and in fact scientifically validated as a great way to lead and to lead our own lives. So all this is in the first pillar of well-being and health. The second pillar is wisdom. Google, new technologies have made it possible for us to have literally unlimited data, to know everything. But you haven't yet made it possible for us to find wisdom. And often, when there is too much data, it's harder and harder to find the needle in the haystack. So we need to tap into our own wisdom. And that's where we need to remember that we all have a place in us, which is an incredible place of inner wisdom, inner strength, and inner peace. But most of us don't live there most of the time. Nobody lives there all the time. So life for me is a little bit of a journey of how quickly can we course correct. How quickly can we identify ourselves being off center and return to center. If you think of it, we know much more about our smartphones than we know about ourselves. We get alerts. 20% battery remaining. 17% battery remaining. By about 13%, we get anxious and we look around for a recharging shrine, lest something would happen to our smartphone. We never say, what, smartphone deal, okay? Just get through it. But we do say that to ourselves all the time, right? And when I collapsed, I start my book, and I'm so glad, thank you so much for getting copies for everybody. So you'll see I start my book with this episode in my own life 7 years ago when I collapsed from exhaustion, burnout, and sleep deprivation, hit my head on the way down, broke my cheekbone, got 4 stitches on my right eye. And as I look back, I must have been below 0% battery remaining, and I didn't even know it. I wasn't even aware of it. So increasing that awareness about our own state of being makes it easier for us to connect with our own wisdom, connect with our own strength. And let me just say, this is important whether you are at the top of the world managing multiple demands on your time and attention, or whether you're just starting in life, or whether you're struggling to put food on the table, wherever you are in life. When we connect with that place, that's when we connect with our resilience. And after all, whether you succeed in life in the bigger sense of the word or not depends on how easily you're discouraged. Because everybody has failed along the way. I have an entire speech on my failures if you want to hear it. Because very often when people look at your success, they don't know how many times you failed along the way. And I think that's terribly unfortunate. Because young people, and I have 2 daughters in their 20s, need to know that failure is not the opposite of success. It's a stepping stone to success. But what makes it possible to accept that, is the fact that you have your own resilience, your own strength and peace and wisdom that you tap into so that you are not just dependent on the outside circumstances of your life. One of the enemies of finding our wisdom is multitasking. And everybody here in this room, including me, has really been brought up in our new era thinking that multitasking enhances our productivity. So I know you Googlers love data. So please look at the 45 pages of scientific endnotes at the end of the book. I put them there for you. You don't have to believe anything I'm saying. Just look at the data. There is no such thing as multitasking. It's task switching. It's the most stressful thing you can do. And it robs you of the ability to experience that third dimension of wonder. Because, life is an incredible mystery. And being connected with the fact that we are living in an incredible mystery is so important for bringing joy into our lives. And multitasking is the enemy of that. I live in New York, and walking down the streets of New York now, you hardly see anybody who is not either on a phone or worse, texting while walking. And texting while walking is seen as a kind of badge of importance because you are so important and so busy that you cannot just walk. And so less important and less busy people need to get out of your way because they are obviously just walking. When I stopped multitasking while I was walking, I started noticing things that I had not noticed before. Next to my apartment, there is this beautiful building with this incredible ornamentation at the top, which I had never seen. And I asked a friend, I said, when did this go up? And she said, 1890. So what else are we missing when we are constantly buried either in our thoughts or in our smartphones? And being buried in our thoughts is another issue that we need to deal with. That's what the whole mindfulness practice is about. It's about being present right here rather than lost in our thoughts, which are often either judging us about what we did or judging somebody else or worrying about what's coming. And our body, again, look at the science, does not distinguish between real things going wrong and our imagination and our thoughts about things going wrong. As Montaigne, the French philosopher, put it, there were many terrible things in my life, but most of them never happened. These are the kind of negative fantasies I tell my daughters, never lose in your own fantasies. they're yours. Make them good. Don't imagine the worst. Incidentally, I don't believe at all the idea that imagine the worst because it prepares you for it. I don't believe that at all. Because when something bad happens, and it happens in all our lives, we are in a position to deal with it because we're fully present, our mind, our emotions, and our body in one place. You cannot deal with something bad when it hasn't happened yet, except by stressing yourself out. And it's amazing just reading the science around how animals operate. Gazelles are my screensaver. They are kind of a role model for me because gazelles, really run really hard when there is a danger, when there is a lion or a leopard chasing them. But the minute the danger passes, they graze. And there's absolutely zero stress in their system. So that's really my ideal state of being. The equivalent for us is of running hard is we have a big project to complete, we have something to do, we put 100% into it, then it's done, but we keep staying in a fight or flight mode. And that's what we need to change, because we need to give ourselves recovery time. How healthy we are depends on how much recovery opportunity we give to our system. And, every religion and every major philosophy really talks in different language about these pauses. Those of you who have studied Japanese philosophy, Zen, or Japanese art, is the concept of ma, which literally means space. And it's something sacred. Bringing space into your life, pauses into your life. The whole tea ritual, whether in England or much more ritualized in Japan, is about pausing. And related to that now is something that we are all engaged in, which is innovation and creativity. This is really the supreme irony that our culture worships innovation and creativity, but we all live in a way that completely kills both of these things. Because there is nothing worse for innovation and creativity than being perpetually connected to our devices. Because we're at the mercy of incoming, what's coming at us. So if you look at some of the major discoveries, whether it's Archimedes, while having a bath, coming out and shouting Eureka and getting out naked, screaming that he found this major law, which would have been a great tweetable moment, right? You could just imagine the retweets. It would have been better than Miley Cyrus twerking. Or, Newton in a contemplative mood in his garden, and suddenly the apple falls. And there's a lot of literature about the fact that he was in a contemplative mood. And when he saw that apple falling, he suddenly thought, why is this all coming down in a perpendicular way? And the law of gravity was born. So for those of us who worship creativity and innovation, we need to realize that time famine and time pressure and burnout really are killing them. And when we look at the history of startups, we know that startup entrepreneurs are notoriously sleep deprived and burning the candle at both ends, and we assume this is the way to do it. But then why do 3/4 of startups fail? Maybe somebody here should do a study about the correlation between sleep deprivation and startup failures. Because we really need new role models, and we need ruthlessly to provide the evidence to eliminate the delusion that burnout is the way to succeed. And I'm constantly in search of new role models. One of my favorites is actually a woman, Padma Sri Warrior, who is the Chief Technology Officer of Cisco. And she oversees tens of thousands of engineers. And she spoke at our Thrive conference, and she said, I sleep for 8 hours, I meditate, I write haikus, I paint, and every Saturday I do a digital detox. And she has a great role model herself, which is God. You know, he worked very hard for 6 days, created heaven and earth, and he took a day off. That's like, I mean, he did a pretty awesome job. I mean, there are a few imperfections here and there. We're still in a beta stage. But nevertheless, this is not just a fairy tale. You know, this is a very significant story about the importance of renewal. And the final pillar, well-being, wisdom, wonder, is giving. Because our culture celebrates go-getters and very occasionally celebrates go-givers. You know, we celebrate them around Christmas and the holidays, but in fact, we now have the science that shows that our genes are wired for giving. And when we give, all the inflammatory markers of disease go down. And giving is basically a shortcut to happiness. And there's great neuroscientific evidence out of the University of Wisconsin about this and about the fact that happiness is a learned skill. Did you know that? That you can learn to be happy? You know, we all think we can learn to play tennis, we can learn to play golf, whatever we can, but we don't realize that we are also learn to be happy. And the Greek word for happiness, in its most profound sense, is evdaimonia, which translated would mean thriving, which is why I picked that word. But in a literal sense, it means, and we have a fellow Greek here who can correct me, it means basically being at peace with your own demons. Because the Greeks realized that ultimately happiness is not a function of external circumstances. It's a function of our inner harmony with our external circumstances. And some people are infinitely dissatisfied no matter what they have, because somebody else may have more. Somebody else always has more. If you value your life just in terms of these two metrics, there's always going to be somebody who is beating you at the game. I like to quote Mikhail Baryshnikov, who said, I don't try to dance better than anyone else. I just try to dance better than myself. And I think it's really great whether you're looking at your life or you're looking at your company. At the Huffington Post, I tell everybody, the most important thing is for us to keep disrupting ourselves, to keep innovating. It's not about what anybody else is doing. We're not competing against anyone else. And that is an incredibly liberating way to look at life. And I would love to see giving time, volunteering, be part of the way we bring up children from an early age. Because I've seen the difference it makes to my children when they were young, and I had more control over what they were doing, and I would take them to volunteer at places of at-risk children where they could see and be in touch with the suffering in the world, which would make them much less narcissistic and much less preoccupied with everything happening in their lives. So these are the 4 pillars of this third metric. And because I very much want the book to be a bridge between knowing what we should be doing and actually doing it, I have 12 steps in the book. I picked 12 deliberately because we are addicted to our current way of life. 12 steps, and you can pick one step to start with, whichever resonates with you, to begin to bring these changes in your life. My first step was sleep. I went from 4 to 5 hours to 7 to 8 hours. And as you said, you know, sleep deprivation is being worn at the moment like a badge of honor by many people. I mean, I had dinner recently with a guy who bragged that he had only gotten 4 hours sleep the night before. And I thought to myself, I didn't say it, but I thought to myself, you know what? If you had gotten 5, this dinner would have been a lot more interesting. But we are all operating from this sense of time famine, you know, of breathlessness, of feeling that we just don't have enough time to sleep. I really just want everybody to carefully look at their discretionary time. people have much more discretionary time than they think. Somebody is watching House of Cards. And that's why I really believe in finding a Thrive buddy, finding somebody in your life who can support you and you can support them as you are introducing new habits. And, if let's say you are tempted to binge watch House of Cards at night, instead of going to sleep, you can call your Thrive buddy and they can cool you down. They can tell you to just take a deep breath and close your laptop, and you can watch it over the weekend. Because the point is that if you don't get enough sleep, do you know that feeling of being tired and walking around like a zombie during the day? I now really hate that feeling. How many people here are sleep deprived today? Okay, you don't have to be. It's just a matter of prioritizing whatever it takes to recharge you. And how much sleep you need is individual. Most people need 8 hours. But whatever you need, you know how you know it? Because you wake up without an alarm. Another very important step is, at the end of the day, turn off all your devices and gently escort them out of your bedroom. Very important, because otherwise you'll wake up and be tempted to look at your data if your smartphone is charging by your bed. And I know all your excuses. Like, I need my smartphone because it's my alarm clock. Okay, well, first of all, if you put it in the room next door, you can still hear it. Or you get a nice vintage-looking alarm clock. In the States, I give them to all my friends from Pottery Barn. They're $32. I'm sure you can find them here. I think Davy Jones, I was told, and Selfridges have them. John, we should do a little research for that so that we can advocate where you can go and get it. The point is, don't allow yourself to be tempted. And I'm only going to mention one more step that was very important to me, which is, at the end of the day, scan your day and look at something that you can drop, that no longer serves you. It could be a grudge, a resentment, some anger, just something. Or it could be a project that you thought you were going to do, but really you're not going to. The latest project that I dropped was becoming a good skier. I decided that really I was not going to invest time and energy into becoming a good skier. And it was very liberating to realize that I could complete a project by dropping it. So as far as I'm concerned, skiing is done. When I go skiing with my daughters or with friends now, they ski and I sit by the fire, I drink hot chocolate and I read a good book, and I'm very happy. So just see what is it that you're not really going to do, and then you can really invest your time and energy into the things you are going to do. So let me wrap up so that we can leave plenty of time for questions by saying that if we are like you, we have 30,000 days to play the game of life. How we play it depends on what we value. And if we only value the first two metrics, we're never really going to be thriving. Because we're always going to be putting our life on hold until we accomplish something. And then as soon as we accomplish that, we'll have another goal, and we're going to be putting our life on hold again. And basically, we'll be shrinking ourselves down to our jobs and our to-do lists. And I just did an interview with Oprah, and she asks everybody the same question at the end: what do you know for sure? And I said to her, what I know for sure is that however magnificent your job is, Oprah, or however great my job is, or however great anybody's job is, who we are in our essence is more magnificent. We are more than our jobs. And if you want reinforcement of that, just remember the last time you were at a memorial service listening to a eulogy. Our eulogies are very different from our resumes. Have you ever heard a eulogy where they said, George was amazing. He increased market share by 1/3. So when we remember all that, then we can really find that place that Archimedes called, give me a place to stand and I can move the world. We all have that place. You know, we call it being in the zone, being in the flow. So we find that place, and from that place we live our lives with more gratitude, more creativity, more joy, and yes, more sleep. Thank you. So who wants to come first? If you don't mind coming to the microphones, because this is being streamed. And also, if you can tell me your name and what you do here, and if you want, how many hours sleep you get. So who wants to go first? Yes.
Thank you so much. It was really, really inspiring and very interesting. My name is Gail. I'm a director in the sales team here at Google. I'm actually also a mum of 2 daughters, 4 and 1. I really would like it if you could have a chat with my 1-year-old at the moment about the sleep thing. That would be really great. But normally I get 8 hours because I'm a huge fan of sleep. I really totally agree with what you're saying. What I would really like to understand from you is, actually, as a working mum yourself, if you could have spoken to yourself kind of 15, 18 years ago when your children were really little, what do you think you would do differently? And have you got any advice for kind of the working parents in the room? Because I think it's not just a woman's role. Absolutely. That's a great question. And so what I would have done differently is to be fully present for my children. Because when I look back, I never missed, a milestone, a performance or a school event, although I never baked the cookies. And it's perfectly okay not to bake the cookies just in case you're guilty about that. Because, I really think that when they take the baby out, they put the guilt in. And, and every working mother I know is guilty that she's not doing a good job. So I would just basically, by practicing the things I'm talking about now, of being recharged myself, I would have been able to be fully present instead of being with them physically, but my mind being somewhere else, like on what I was going to do tomorrow or what I didn't do or my incompletions, etc. So that's my biggest advice, and because I really think that we miss so much. And these are such special years. And even though, I'm sure there are times when your 1-year-old wakes you up at night, it's just unbelievably adorable. And there will be times later in your life when you would want to spend more time with that 1-year-old. But is it a boy or a girl? Girl. But she will be awfully busy. So, so treasure every moment. And it's not easy. No question about it. That's why I'm also a big believer in naps. And I'm glad you have nap pods here. Use them. Use them liberally. Because a 20-minute nap, if you've had a disrupted night of sleep because of a young child or a sick toddler, but a 20-minute nap, as Winston Churchill famously proved, by calling them power naps, having them regularly, and winning the war against Germany, you can win any sales war by, recharging yourself. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Hannah. I work in the sales finance team. I was also very happy to hear about that you sleep 8 hours, because that's what I try to do as well. Something that you said that really resonated with me was that failures are stepping stones to success and not the opposite of success. Could you give an example of something that may have appeared like a failure in your life, but in fact it was just a step to achieve success?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, for example, just to start with my early years, I went to Cambridge and I lived in London for 7 years, and I wrote my first book by accident. I didn't want to be a writer. I was actually going to the Kennedy School to do a postgraduate degree in politics, when I was asked by publisher who had seen me on television at Cambridge debate this topic to write a book. So my first book did very well. And then I wanted to write a book on the crisis in political leadership, which I wrote by spending, I subsidized myself by spending the money I had made with my first book. And that book was rejected by 36 publishers. And that's a lot of rejections. And by rejection 36, I was thinking that maybe this was the wrong career for me, that maybe my first book was a fluke. And I was walking down St. James's Street, despondent and having run out of money. And I saw Barclays Bank, and I walked in. And armed with nothing but Greek chutzpah, I asked to see the bank manager, and I asked for an overdraft. And for some reason, he gave it to me. I still send him a Christmas card every year. And that's something important to remember during moments of failure, when things are not working out, that we are not alone. That it's a little bit like in fairy tales, when the hero or the heroine is lost in a dark forest, and all these helpful animals come out to help them find their way out. Well, in life, too, there are helpful animals disguised as human beings, as bank managers, there to help us. And that's a very important way to live life. In fact, one of my favorite quotes in Thrive, which I have laminated in my wallet, is from Rumi, the poet who said, "Live life as though everything is rigged in your favor." So whatever happens, if we can approach it from, this is here to teach me something. In fact, there is an incredible quote. I'm going to give you a cliff note, page 118 of the book. My favorite long quote, too long to read to you now, by Marcus Aurelius, who was a Stoic philosopher and the emperor of Rome. So the guy had a pretty big job. And at the end of each night, he would go to bed and write what became his famous book, Meditations. And in that book, in that quote, he talks about how everything that happens to us has a hidden blessing and a hidden purpose. And when we look at it that way, sort of life is transformed. Because very often, a lot of our pain and heartache come from our attitude to what happens to us, rather than just from what happens to us.
Thank you.
Hi there. I'm Mark. I work at YouTube. Fascinating talk. Can't wait to read your book. I do have one question, though. So you spoke a little bit about getting thoughts spiraled in your head about negativity, building up to scenarios that actually never happen. I know my family is specifically guilty of doing this kind of thing. So I'm really interested to hear, from you, specific tips or tricks to help people to stop themselves from getting into a place where they start thinking like that.
Yes. So first of all, if we kind of recognize that that voice is not who we are, and that's why I call it the obnoxious roommate living in my head. And every time that comes up, that voice, I think a sense of humor really helps. And making it clear that thoughts are not facts. And thoughts are not you. So there's that thing going on. And if you approach it like a sort of a toddler, kind of screaming or making, being disruptive, but it's not who you are and it's not facts, it begins to weaken the power it has on you. I promise you, I had the most obnoxious roommate living in my head, very self-judgmental, and now she only makes guest appearances. And the energy that became available to me when that voice subsided is amazing. Because, we look at our life in terms of time chunks, but really it's all about energy. When you are operating at 100% of your energy, you can get stuff done in 1 hour that otherwise would take you a day. So, and a function of good energy isn't just how much sleep we get or how rested we are. It's also what we're doing with our thoughts and what we're doing with our minds. So, but I promise you that you can evict the obnoxious roommate almost entirely.
Ioanna. I am actually Greek as well.
Oh, great.
And we could do this in Greek, but it would be unfair. Fascinating talk. Thank you so much. I guess what I wanted to understand is you mentioned a lot something about what you said when we die, what's going to be on our deathbed or on our
eulogy.
And I've thought about that a lot. So to sort of, even at university, I remember thinking, God, I'm studying so hard, but what if I die tomorrow? What's the point? I've missed a day. What has driven you, having that thought, what currently drives you to do all the other things that you're doing, knowing that at the end of it, what really matters are sort of love, people, friendship, etc.?
Great question. First of all, having conversations about death is incredibly important because our culture has really driven death away from our lives. And in our Greek culture, of course, Socrates famously used to say, practice death daily, not out of morbidity, but because it puts everything else in perspective. And now all over Europe, and now they've come to the States, there are these death cafes that have come up where people can get together and discuss their thoughts about death. There is another movement called Death Over Dinner, when people get together, have dinner, and discuss death. And The Onion, the humorous magazine in the States, had a feature on death recently, and the headline was, "Death rate holds steady at 100%." So I think having that realization and consciousness then means that you really want to focus on the things that can make the most difference. And for me, one of the reasons why I love speaking, say, here to you about this is because I love the thought that if enough of us begin to bring these changes into our lives, we are going to really very quickly reach a critical mass. And for those of you with a scientific background here, you know that a critical mass is when there's enough radioactive material for the change to become self-sustaining. So that's what we need here. It's just enough people introducing these changes in our lives will make this the new reality. Right now, we're like in a period of transition where there is a global shift happening. Thrive is part of the global shift. But if we can accelerate the shift, then the current way we live, being hyper-connected 24/7, burning out, perpetually stressed, perpetually anxious, is going to be seen as barbaric. And it's going to be a little bit like when we moved from the Dark Ages to the Renaissance, when we stopped believing that the earth is flat. Everything changes, and I want to be alive to see that change. I think it's going to be amazing, and it's going to lead to an incredible amount of creativity, go-giving, and at every level, we'll be able to deal with our problems better, including at the political level. I'm speaking this afternoon at the House of Commons, where there is now a mindfulness movement. There are 97 members of the House of Commons, peers and staffers who have weekly meditation and mindfulness courses. And if you look around at the moment, you see that our leaders, most of our leaders, are so mired in that second metric of power that they are not able to make good decisions because they look at everything through that filter of, is this going to help my re-election or not? And not to mention the impact of burnout on decision making. It's so funny because I was speaking at the US Embassy, and I said something in my speech about nap rooms in the embassy, and the ambassador said, that sounds like a good idea, we should do that. And there was an article about it in the Huffington Post, and the State Department yesterday felt that they had to put a statement out saying that nobody in the State Department sleeps on the job. It just shows how archaic is their thinking. And the spokeswoman said she understands the importance of achieving work-life balance, and one day she aspires to it. And so basically, she used the fact that she doesn't have work-life balance, which I think actually is a terrible term, but we know what she means, as a badge of honor. Hey, you know, I'm too busy to worry about these things. So this is the kind of thinking that I want to make obsolete. So I want it very soon to be completely laughed at. And I want politicians who it's found out that they've pulled all-nighters to then have to do damage control about that, because we can't trust their decisions as much.
Hi there, I'm Zoe, I work in the marketing team here. Thank you for coming in, it was really inspiring.
Thank you.
I come to talks like this and I think I'm going to change something in my life, and then real life tends to just get in the way. So I was just wondering, what are your sort of any tips that you have about really sticking to your principles and making a change? Do you, you mentioned a Thrive Buddy, but do you tend to write things down and review them every so often, or how do you make them stick?
So the first thing, and it may sound counterintuitive, is not to judge yourself when we determine to do something and then we don't do it. To just say, give ourselves another chance and another chance, and to make the changes that we start with very small. Because especially all these driven A types here, I identify with that. We want to, if we like something and we want to bring the changes, we want to just make them wholesale. And then it becomes much harder to implement them. So just pick something very manageable. Just pick one thing. Like I suggest getting 30 minutes more sleep than you're getting now. Or charging your phone away from your bedroom. Or making a gratitude list. I think that's something which is incredibly helpful. And my daughter, I write about it in the book, you know, got involved in drugs in her last year in college. That was one of the heartbreaks, the difficult moments in my life in the last 2 years. She's now been sober and went back and graduated, and all is good. But one of the things that helped her a lot was making this gratitude list every night of 3 things she's grateful for, and sharing it with 2 friends who shared their lists with her. And that begins to get your mind trained to focus on the good things. Because we are trained to focus on the bad things. And that had some survival benefit, you know, because if, let's say, we're pursued by a leopard and we focused on the rainbow, we would be toast. So, but now it's not just focusing on the real dangers, we focus on all those imaginary dangers. So learning to focus on things that we're grateful for is a great exercise for this.
Thank you.
Hi, Arianna. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Go for it.
Yes, thank you so much for that. So pleased that you mentioned the giving side of things, which I think is so important. And I remember many years ago a mentor of mine saying that you go through stages in life. You start with a learning phase, and then an earning phase, and then a serving phase. But he said, what if you could do all 3 of those things at the same time, which is something I've been trying to do, and I do a lot of charitable work. But I was... at Google, we give time to people to do serving things 2.5 days a year, and I was lucky enough to go to Tanzania for 17 days to do a volunteering project recently, where we helped a rural village to put a water supply into place. And it was an important thing because villagers, mainly women and children, were walking for 6 to 8 hours a day to get, you know, 1 bucket of not so clean water. But I remember being in the middle of that time and thinking, this isn't a scalable thing. You know, I'm not really designed to be digging and stuff. Why don't I get a bobcat or, you know, hire a digger to do this? But we then spoke to the chairman of the village, and he said, actually, you know, what really made the difference to us was that you were with us, you were living in the community, you were working side by side along, you know, with us, and that really inspired us. So I think that the type of giving that you give, not just the money, but your time, is quite an important thing. But my question is, what are other companies doing, what are other organizations doing that you see to really encourage the right sort of giving that really gives you a lot of energy and makes you feel a lot less stress. What are you seeing?
So thank you. That's a great point. I mean, I see more and more companies encouraging giving. At the Huffington Post and at AOL, which is our parent company. You know, we give 3 paid days for volunteering, and we match volunteer contributions up to a certain amount. You see that happening more and more across the world in many companies. But also, as you said, it's something which we can take up ourselves, whatever our circumstances. That is what is so interesting. I have a story in the book of a good friend of mine who lost her job during the financial collapse. She had a big job in investment banking. She had never been out of work. She was completely undone by that. And I was talking to her, and I said, well, you know, this might be a good time for you to volunteer in this place that I was on the board of, a place for at-risk children in Los Angeles called a place called Home. And she looked at me like I had lost all empathy and compassion. and I said, well, you know, you are going to be looking for a new job, but this is the first time in your life you have time. So, you know, you can give a couple of hours. And she did it. And it was just transformational. She was telling me how, first of all, it put her own problems in perspective. She stopped feeling so sorry about herself. I really believe she got another job faster. But also, she told me that story of how every night they would do a forgiveness circle. And she was part of that circle, and she forgave her daughter for forgetting her birthday. And the young woman next to her forgave her father for shooting her mother. And that connected her with a whole world out there, whether it's in Tanzania, where people have to walk for hours to get a bucket of not very clean water, or whether it's in inner cities, where people are living at the mercy of drive-by shootings and real dangers. It takes us away from our own narcissistic preoccupations and our own questioning, you know, our bodies and our accents and our clothes and our place in the pecking order.
My question is about awareness about well-being. So you mentioned, you know, how to recognize your batteries being drained. Do you have any tips around that? Because I feel like most people in this room probably tend to think, oh, I'll go hard for a week and then it'll be okay. And the week becomes a month and so on.
Yes, absolutely. First of all, what happens is that the more recharged you are, the sharper your awareness gets. So you begin to notice any kind of departure from the center. You know, I was talking to a pilot friend of mine who said to me that airplanes fly off course most of the time. The reason that there aren't more accidents is because they have an impeccable course-correcting mechanism. So little by little, your mechanism of noticing these things becomes truly impeccable. And it's a matter of where do you start? You know, how recharged are you? And I find that the minute I feel stress rising or tiredness, there are lots of little keys in the book that you can practice. One is your breath. Your breath is an incredible recharging tool. So wherever you are, you can just focus on your breath, you know, breathing deeper, exhaling deeper, you know, just nobody else needs to notice it. I do it regularly in boring board meetings. You know, I move into deep breathing. And also, the other thing you can do is look at your schedule immediately and see, is there anything here that I can drop? Is there something I can do without? Is there a meeting that is 1 hour that I can make half an hour? And I try as much as possible, when it's not pouring with rain, to do meetings, to have walking meetings. Especially if it's one-on-one, it's just great to just go for a walk, which is much more recharging. And if possible, having a nap, you know, just depending on where you are and what's possible. But I think our awareness increases every time we do it. It's like building a muscle. The more we do it, and the more we pay attention to it, because now many of us don't pay attention to it at all. I had a young woman in San Francisco who came to me after my speech and said, I don't remember the last time I was not tired. So many of us have been in that state. So it's like building a new muscle, and then it becomes easier and easier. I want to thank you so much for being here, for taking this time out of your very busy lives. And I want to invite you to continue this conversation on the Huffington Post, because I feel one of the ways we can help people bring these changes in their lives without having their own painful wake-up calls, as I did, or worse, is to learn from the wake-up calls of others and to learn from the thriving recipes of others. So I'm going to give you my email address, which is Arianna, with 1 R and 2 N's, at huffingtonpost.com. And if there's anything you want to write about, please send it to me. And also we have a campaign we launched, #HowIThrive. So if you have anything you do in your life that helps you thrive, share it with others, because you never know who else may be inspired and may want to do it too. Thank you. And thank you so much for making this happen.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I just want to say, I just want to say, reflecting on what you said, you know, when I was being present and reflecting on wonder, I mean, it is really amazing to have you here talk to us about this in person. So I really want to thank you for that. And in your words of giving, you know, we could do the gift of giving by telling more people about this book, Google Plusing, YouTubing, right? Tweeting about it. So give the gift of Thrive to everybody you know after you've read it. And thank you so much. So much. You've been amazing.
Thank you.